Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us bright and early on this Wednesday morning. So this is the panel discussion for Roku advertising. So we've got a panel of experts here today lined up to talk about advertising on the Roku platform, and hopefully we'll get to answer some questions for you and solve any problems that you might have integrating with RAF. So let's talk about the agenda. So just so everybody knows what we're planning to talk about this morning, we're going to start with a brief introduction so you know who we are and why we're talking to you today. Then we'll move on to some of our recent RAF releases, bring everybody up to speed on what we've been up to over the last year or so. And then we want to talk about a couple new features that maybe not everybody is completely familiar with. We'll talk about how those work and what they mean for channel developers. And then finally, we'll move on to the main focus of this panel, which is an open discussion on topics related to advertising on Roku. So the next slide is going to have the QR code for our Slido forum. So if you'd like to get your QR readers ready, and then maybe Jonathan or someone can also post a link in the chat, just in case not everybody is able to capture this. So this forum is going to be where you can submit questions, and we'll try to do our best at the end of the presentation, or actually, the bulk of the presentation is going to be answering those questions, or at least connecting you with the resources that you need to get answers to them. So if you already have questions or want to start thinking about what we might be able to help out with this discussion, follow this link and submit your questions, and we'll try to pick ones that are sort of generally applicable. Jonathan will be sifting through those and picking out some good ones. So I'm just going to leave this up for a few more seconds, just so everybody has a chance to follow that link. All right. So if you just joined this discussion without having a lot of background with RAF, that's a term that you're going to be hearing over and over again throughout this presentation. Most of you are probably already familiar enough with it, but just sort of briefly, RAF is our BrightScript SDK library, provides features related to fetching ads from ad servers and rendering them as part of a channel's streaming content. So it's meant to be kind of a common tool set for developers who want to monetize their content. And it supports a variety of different use cases, of several different features designed to facilitate ad tech on the Roku platform. And generally, the main goal of this is to make developers' lives easier. So on the panel today, we have Nas Banoff, Yoshi Mizutani, and myself, and we're all representing the software engineering side. And we also have Dan Schneier and Robin Sneed. And you may already be familiar with these guys representing our AdOps solution engineering. There's a few things that we want to talk about today. So just the goals, we'll talk briefly about, kind of what's new and exciting in the world of Roku ad tech. And then we're going to go in a little more detail on a couple new features and why you might be interested in them. So, and then at the end, we'll move on to, the real substance of this panel. And so we'll shift the format from this kind of dry PowerPoint to a more interactive workshop style format. So please submit your questions on the Slido page, and we'll try to connect you with some answers to those questions. Okay, so what have we been up to over the last year? So like most of you, we've all been busy working at home on a number of things. So the last two RAF releases, 2.15 and 2.16, we haven't had a great deal of new developer-facing features, but we wanted to take this opportunity to talk about a couple that we think are kind of important. So first up, let's talk about Demand API. So if you're not familiar with header bidding in general, it's a way of optimizing programmatic ads by conducting a real-time bidding for your ad inventory through outside ad exchanges. So, obviously, as we're showing here, one of the main goals of that is for more efficient monetization of your content, but still giving you some control over how your inventory is allocated. And then the other big initiative this year, we started getting more serious about countering ad fraud. So you may have even heard about, a couple of incidents that got a little publicity over the last year. Obviously, protecting the value of our ad ecosystem is a top priority for both Roku and we know it's as well for our publishers. So one of the ways we're doing this is through watermarking of ad requests and impression pixels. And this is done through RAF, and it allows the pixels and ad requests to be validated by IVT vendors, so you can be sure that they originated on a Roku device. And then, of course, we have sort of our favorite catch-all category, bug fixes and other improvements. Not a lot to say, but I just wanted to pick out one item on there that's kind of notable. We did actually spend a fair amount of time over the past year trying to slim down the RAF library and improve resource usage for some types of interactive ads. Okay, so let's talk about some of these new features in a little more detail. What are they about and how do they work? So Demand API, what does it do? It provides publishers with kind of automated access into demand sources without going through the typical DFP waterfall. And so the way it does this is through two new API functions in RAF. The first function queries our demand API for a set of ads that satisfy certain criteria that you, the publisher, would establish. And then it returns a list representing the available demand that meets that criteria, along with some additional metadata, including information about pricing, duration, and the category of the ads. The second function lets the publisher use the data that's returned from this first function to allocate your ad inventory and then fetch the ad creatives from the appropriate ad servers. So this allows publishers the chance to expose more of their inventory, get an overall increase in yield and fill rate, and still retain control over how that inventory is allocated. And as it says here, I'm just going to read this directly because it's a little wordy. Provides fully automated and self-service support for competitive separation, dynamic pricing, and demand from other sources, including SSPs. So that's a lot of words. So let's look at a diagram to kind of see how this works. Okay, so there's a fairly simple flow that's represented in this diagram. So the first step, as I mentioned before, we start with the ad query API call from your app into the demand API. Again, passing parameters for metadata about how you would like those ads filled. And then the second step is the demand API sends out bid requests, and those go to our Roku demand service as well as third-party ad exchanges. They do this kind of real-time bidding process, and then the ad query call returns a representation of those results back to your application in the form of an associative array. So then there's some decisioning that happens in your channel about which ads you're going to use from the query, and then you make the second function call, which fills the ads from the ad servers and returns the ad creatives in a metadata format that's very similar to what you would get from the get ads call that you're probably all familiar with already. Okay, and we'll again, if there's questions, feel free to ask in Slido. We'll try to address those at the end. So then the second big feature that we wanted to talk about was ad watermarking. Just some background about why this is important for us. So, one definition of ad fraud is any generation of IVT or invalid traffic to redirect ad spend away from actual ad opportunities. So connected TV is a growing target, and it's got relatively high CPM compared to web and display ads. So, and also the fact that unlike display ads on the web, there isn't yet a robust set of fraud detection tools available. So it's kind of a rich target, and it's one that we know a lot of people are going after. So as the largest AVOD platform, Roku has become an increasingly large target for conducting ad fraud. As I mentioned before, there were a couple incidents over the past year or so, and I think in general, we've done a pretty good job of trying to cut down on that. But obviously, we need a larger strategy going forward. So obviously, protecting the value of the ad ecosystem is sort of mutually important, both for us and for you guys. Obviously, to protect the value of your ad inventory. So how does this work? Okay, the main goal, so we want to provide a means of ensuring that both ad requests and impressions are actually coming from a Roku device and not, say, from a click farm or even from rogue applications on a Roku device that are firing their own tracking pixels in a way that circumvents our ability to detect that they're being fired. So how does this work? When you call RAF APIs to fetch ads or to fire tracking pixels, we add a token to the HTTP headers. So this includes claims about the validity of that token that can then be later reconciled against our own logging. So the token is also cryptographically signed so that the contents can be verified by outside IVT vendors to ensure that it was generated on a Roku device. And the way this is integrated, it's completely transparent to the publishers. There's no integration work needed other than just using the RAF APIs that you already use. And adoption of this watermark is already underway, and we're working with a group of demand partners right now. And over the next year or so, I think we're going to be greatly expanding the scope of this watermarking to protect the value of your ad inventory. So that's sort of a brief description of what we've been doing over the past year. So I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan, who's been moderating our questions. And hopefully we've got some interesting ones for the panel to address. So Jonathan, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen. We do have some questions. So thank you so much, Doug. That was great.
Yep.
So give me 1 second here, and then we will, oops. All right, let's see what we have here. So let's start with, we've got the questions that we seeded here already, but let me start with John has a question. Does Roku have any collateral that we can provide to potential clients regarding the demand API that explains to them what they need to do with Roku to get things rolling before vendors can do active development against the demand API?
I can take that one. So there's a kickoff sort of process that takes place with any partner that we engage with Demand API. And we've got a small team at Roku, so we've been approaching that at a cadence that is, sustainable. So we have a queue of partners that are going through it. The ultimate goal is to have all partners on Demand API, but it takes, every integration is different and we're having to work through those. So that documentation, as we're working through, we go through new versions and improve it. And I think if you don't have the documentation yet, then by the time you do, it'll be even better than it is today. So it's a relatively new product. We have had good success in rolling it out, but it's more of a hands-on onboarding than even previous integrations of RAMs, tags, or other ways you may have received ads from Roku in the past. This requires a lot of tech resources on both ends to coordinate, but not to actually implement. So yeah, I would say that it's nothing that we have publicly available at a link that you can go and see, but the general requirements and the overview of what is expected is laid out in our certification rules and is something that you can review. So if you have any specific questions, I can answer them, but because of the sensitivity around the partners and onboarding and all of that and the queues, and we've got that all presented in a kickoff call in a PDF that is not publicly available.
Excellent. The next question, actually, you guys have upvoted one of the questions that we asked. So that's a first. So why is the certification process separated between general channel evaluation and ads evaluation?
So I can take that one too. I'm the one that runs the certification for ads. And it's something where we have a lot of server side integrations that happen related to ads. We have a lot of compliance checks that go on that require the channel be running in production, like DAR measurability, for instance. We want to see that the production channel is able to run those DAR ads on them and successfully, and that's a certification requirement. So that's not necessarily tied to a code change in the app or an update in the channel. And I think that's kind of at the heart of it, right? We have to maintain a certain level of quality of in the ads ecosystem, and that isn't necessarily tied to code changes in the app. Whereas a lot of the other requirements like deep linking and the way that the load time happens and the indicator comes up that there's something loading, and all of that is more of a client side related certification rules. So yeah, that's why they're separate. A lot of there are still ads checks done when you submit your channel. They're done at scale. We have a team of people that have a device test bed that they're able to run different checks on, and automations and such. The evaluations that I do for ads onboarding is a lot more hands-on, and trying to understand your ad stack, trying to understand what changes are made to your providers and maintain relationships with them. And it's a lot more hands-on, I would say, than the typical evaluations. So that's why they're separate.
Excellent. Sort of another certification question, but where did this go? Someone actually had a question. Oh, right here. And actually, I think I get to answer this one to start with. Is there any documentation around the requirements, deliverables process for RAF certification, specifically for SSAI? And and Charles, I answered some of your questions already, but yeah, we do have, there's our certification documentation has all the ad-related requirements in section 1, and I gave you a link to that. And those requirements are sort of encompass all different methods, whether it's client side or server side. They're all applicable to those, but you guys can, Robin, you can expand on that.
Sure. Yeah. Really, the requirements for server side ad requests and client side ad requests are very similar. There's a couple of exceptions for live due to previous performance issues in live, where you would see, as you approach the end of a very long stream, the ads metadata and where the ads actually were in the stream, there would be a drift. So we have some requirements around live scenarios like that are waived. For instance, that UI that RAF puts up, it's not required that you do so on top of a live game to show an ad there. So that's kind of the nature of it. If there's some sort of technical issue related to SSAI that we have to work through, there's some leniency on those requirements, but otherwise it's the same. And there is good documentation on different providers and what the best path forward would be in integrating with those. It's when we can get, I see another question related to that specifically further down, and we can talk about that when we get there, but it should be almost the same as the client side requirements.
Which question do you want to take that's related? If you see another.
Okay, sure. What steps is Roku taking to go down a little bit more to drive relationships with ads providers and their interfaces within partner apps? So let's throw out some examples. You've got Adobe, you've got Elemental Media Tailor, Amazon's product, you've got Google DAI and the IMA SDK. All of these things are methods of getting to talk back and forth with a stitching provider that is responsible for taking content and inserting ads in it, and then documenting where in that stream the ads are taking place so it can communicate that down to the client. The client will know, okay, this is an ad break. We're going to fire off trackers here or not, or whatever. All of that knowledge and how to get it and how to use it is unique to each stitching provider. And therefore, we need some sort of adapter in for each provider that works inside of Roku apps in a way that is easy to implement and is sort of just like Google DAI's IMA SDK. You're able to, with minimal effort, implement RAF, have ads that are stitched come back in a stream and play, and all of the certification requirements are met. And it's something that you just kind of have to put into your app and it works. that's the ideal, right? Is that we would have that kind of relationship with the partner, the provider partner that is responsible for the stitcher and knows the ins and outs and knows when something new is coming and can give us a heads up about it. I think that's the way that we have it with Google right now. They'll submit their SDK, and we'll go through an evaluation similar to how a channel is evaluated when it's published. And it'll go out and we'll monitor and keep a very close eye on it. That's not the same with every provider. So what are we doing? We're trying to build those relationships and get it up to that ideal where we do have those, at least quarterly meetings with providers. We are trying to get them to build their own version of the SDK and submit it like a channel, and to kind of meet the quarterly cadence of RAF releases. And yeah, I think that's where we're going with that. That'll help with partners having a clear-cut implementation of the SDKs, and have the providers understand changes that are coming at Roku, and Roku understand the changes coming with the provider. So yeah, that's the next steps with those sorts of things. It's a full-time job working with each provider and trying to get those things nailed down.
Excellent. Great answer. Stuart asks, is it possible for a small channel to implement RAF from the start without making volume commitments during the early growth period? Compare AWS, which makes it really easy, economical to use their services to get started.
I would say yes. The ads BD contingent is not present on this call, so I'm going to speak as much as I can about this, and still feel comfortable. But there's a click-through agreement where most partners are subject to, unless there's some sort of custom contract written up. But that's where, so we'll focus on that. That's the kind of thing where there's a certain percentage that Roku can run ads in your inventory, but it's up to Roku if those ads run there or not. And in smaller channels, they may not. So Roku's suggestion is to work with third-party ads providers like, Yumi or Freewheel or App Nexus, or there's so many different ones around now that you can interface with and get ads served in your channel. You're just provided with a URL, and you don't even need to have an ad server. You can just traffic it directly within RAF. And so that kind of takes a lot of the requirements out. Roku isn't going to necessarily require that lower channels, or enforce that lower channels meet a certain threshold to run ads, but they will require that you meet a certain threshold to run Roku ads. So that's the difference, right? Is Roku's not going to supply ads to your channel unless there's a certain threshold met, which is a similar sort of scenario that YouTube has. They have certain thresholds for their ads participations and things. And so this is kind of a standard now to have that base level of requirement. But that's not to say that you can't run your own ads there and have your own relationships with third-party providers and get those from that source.
Yeah, I would like to comment that so technically the use of RAF is not tied to use of Roku demand. It's configurable. It's made on purpose, easy for use, including by small channels. So the issue is not technical. I suppose the question in a way is asking, will Roku provide URL? Will it go into a partnership? It may be on case-by-case act, but technically there is no problem, and it works great with any kind of standard VAST, VMAP, Smart XML feeds.
Great. Thanks, Nas, for adding on. All right, easy one here on demand API documentation. It's only available on request right now. Any plans to change this?
So, we in our demand API documentation include a test endpoint URL. And I know that there's been some concerns about broadcasting that too widely, denial of service attacks and such. But I think that there's some documentation that could be included, and we can take a cue here and try to get more of a general overview. But I think that's the concern, is that people who either have nefarious goals or just are confused would try to call it in a way that would impact other users of the product, just because it's a publicly exposed system. So I think that was one of the concerns in putting it out there. But we need to talk through it and try to, as I mentioned, the goal is to ultimately have all partners that get ads from Roku using it. So I think that we will see that develop.
Okay. SSI integration using our connectors is complicated. Any thoughts on making this more plug and play or module based?
Yeah, I think that was covered a little bit already, that we're working on a relationship with partners where it's more towards the ideal, where they're responsible for submitting their own SDKs, and Roku is going to defer to them essentially on the best methods of implementing and checking their apps like we would their SDKs like we would a channel. And so that having it as a compartmentalized sort of, or a component that can be referenced within an app, I think is the ideal. Whereas right now you may see a big block of code or something that you have to implement. Eventually the idea is that they would be all incorporated into sort of an SDK.
Great. All right, from Ron, I'm using the RAF and my Roku supplied VAS tag is a Google DFP one. I get annually expiring reports emailed daily, but they show only impressions served with no indication of ad fill. Is there any way the reporting can be improved?
So, yeah, I mean, there is an effort to improve the ads reporting with portal development, and I'm not sure how the ad request is being sourced, but I think some of the limitations on Roku are where we're getting our reporting from and where it's at right now. So yeah, that's a product that Roku has where it's under development, and there is going to be a public portal for use for reporting eventually. But I think that we're still working with some choice partners on that right now and trying to work through some of that initial sort of cutting of teeth with that product. So it's on our radar to have increased reporting abilities and make that more exposed to partners.
Great. All right, I think we're down to the last question from Stephen. I could be mistaken, but RAF appears to still be using the old RO image canvas for the buffering screen and presumably other deprecated BrightScript components. Any plans for updating that to scene graph to help facilitate customization?
So
Yes,
that is
you handle it. I think you're not mistaken. Yeah, it is using RO image canvas. I would say, we sort of have internal plans to kind of overhaul some of our UI, and you're already seeing changes to some of our core UI, roll into production with the last couple of firmware releases. So I would say that we do have plans to remove this, but nothing that we can put on a timeline.
So I would say it doesn't use raw image canvas for buffering unless you're doing SDK1 integration. So RAF has multiple modes, and for legacy reasons, it still supports SDK1 integration. Origin integration happens since version 2.0. Right now, we are on 2.16 in production. 2.17 is rolling out. SDK1 use is under 2% right now. Some things have been deprecated, for example, interactive ad support. But if you are calling the old API, which is, for example, calling show ads without SyncGraph view parameter, then you would be falling under SDK1 fallback. There should be a warning. We may become more active because apps that are using the old API may encounter issues. It's a compatibility mode. Over.
Okay. Excellent. So
we skipped through one question on there that maybe we should go back and answer. So somebody had asked a question about IVT, and I think maybe you clicked past it, about what Roku is doing to address IVT once we actually detect it.
Sorry about that. Yeah, let me. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's a good question. NASA's been involved with that effort this year, so maybe you'd like to address that. What do we do when we actually see an evidence of one of these ad fraud incidents?
Well, we do work with IVT vendors direct. Their different reports come to us. We work with them. We bought on ad exchanges, SSPs, DSPs, or as case maybe we may take direct measure against publishers after it's been thoroughly investigated and proven that particular publisher. There was one case in the news recently about Pareto/Octobot schema in which Roku took down apps by a single publisher. Over.
Right.
All right. Down to these are going to be the last two questions as we have the next team waiting to go. So documentation on Roku's ad stitching methods for SSAI seem very sparse. I'd love to see a more standard, robust, and easy API for implementing SSAI and ad break markers. And I think we've kind of Robin's probably covered this already twice, but I mean, you can kind of restate the answer again.
No, I agree, Ron. Yeah. I agree that this documentation leaves a lot to be desired. I'll provide a little context that Roku was attempting to create these without much help from the stitching providers initially, and now we've come a long way in establishing contacts over there and getting kind of a Slack group set up with them, just like we have with partners. And I think that's bridged a lot of gaps. We get more indicators that things are coming down the pipe and how things should work. And so, yeah, eventually the goal is to have the provider partners implement their own documentation for these and provide it to Roku. And Roku will essentially reference it after confirming that it's functional and that it meets the requirements. So I think that's what you'll see coming next, is those relationships facilitating better sort of tools for you on the Roku end.
So last question. The construct stitch stream method returns native video extended node-like object that will not be used to render ads together with main content. If we're using a custom renderer, the events will not be reported. Any way to have the events reported in a custom renderer?
Yeah, currently that's not really supported. So client-side ad stitching, which this construct stream, that's what that's referring to. Originally we sort of rolled it out with a very limited number of partners. We would like to have it more broadly adopted, and we recognize that a lot of people want custom rendering. So I think that's something that we're definitely interested in, and we'd like, actually this is an opportunity. In general, we would like to hear feedback from developers about what features would be most useful to them, and this is one that comes up in our internal discussions a lot. So if you think this is useful and you'd like to see that implemented, please reach out to Robin and Dan and whoever your contact is, and let them know that that's something you would like. I think ultimately we prioritize those features based on perceived need for it, or perceived demand for it.
Excellent. All right. That is going to conclude our panel session.